Well, we're getting down to the end. This term has gone by super fast. I mean, each time it just seems to go a little faster. Hopefully, at some point we'll do in-person classes again. But yeah, my apologies. Sometimes the distance ones just seem to really go by fast because there's just not as much interaction. I hope you all got out of the course what you uh, what you hope to. Um, if there's any other items I've missed, and you want me to address it, what I'm going to do is we're going to talk about some items here, some kind of catch-up items, and then there's going to be a review before the final exam, and then that's going to pretty much wrap it up. So, um, I've got a couple inputs on the midterm, and I always make an offer out there that if people, I realize students don't really like, they want the freedom to do certain things, but then they want kind of a checklist. And the term paper doesn't really lend itself to that because there's so many different situations. And I really do think you get more out of it by, you know, having to put some thought into how you're going to structure your, more or less your financial future. There's a lot of items in the syllabus that you'll see that are in there to talk about in the term paper for how, things that should be considered. And there's a basic page length. But other than that, I mean, you've got quite a bit of freedom. So, because of sort of the vague nature of it, I think sort of the compromise is that if you're really having questions, then, do your best and then send me a draft, fairly soon, whatever, next few weeks, certainly before the final, and, look for some input on it. And, I can kind of tell you what you're lacking and you're in a tentative grade. If it's handed in as is, but if you improve it, what you can do to get it up to the A or whatever the grade that you're looking for. So anyway, I think there's really some good that can come from the whole project because it kind of forces you to come up with a plan. And again, you should be sort of motivated since this isn't just a class requirement. This is something that hopefully you can use later on in life. Anyway, I don't mean to sound pretentious, but I do think it is kind of important that you do have a plan at some point to uh, to figure all this stuff out. All right. So, some of the things we're going to talk about tonight. Um, we talk a lot about, at least in the second half of the course, about different investments and there's probably certain investments, and I'm not, investments are kind of like religion. I'm not trying to change your mind. If you're dead set on something, and more power to you. Um, I can tell you just from personal experience what has worked and what hasn't. I've never been a person to really own gold. I've owned silver, but anybody who listens to a podcast, it seems like half those guys are, especially now I don't listen to news other than all the streaming sources, which usually don't have the commercials, but somehow they still seem to sneak them in with their gold and silver type things, and they I don't know, it seems almost predatory upon some of the older folks where they're trying to get them to put their money in there. um, I'm just saying, do your research before you invest in those things. Look at the um, you know the rate of appreciation on those. Anyway, I'll go more into it as we go through that. I'll have a chart or two to show you. Collectibles, I've been there too. I did, like I said, I was in the military and I spent a lot of time in the Middle East. And people, oh yeah, you need to buy rugs. These Persian rugs, these very beautiful rugs. But again, I kind of pursued that in terms of um, how you go about selling a lot of those collectibles. The dealers, if you had your own, boutique or something, yeah, you might be able to command the top price and get some amazing price, or maybe again through the internet, maybe direct access to buyers. you might be able to avail yourself of a price. But if you're going to be selling this, through Facebook Marketplace or something like that, the buyers are looking for a deal, and very rarely will they give you what you want. The other problem with that is, especially like when I was in Afghanistan, um, I was offered a number of times, all these jewels and even gold and stuff, and come to find out that a lot of that stuff was fake. So you've got that to worry about as well, the authenticity of the collectibles. Speculative stocks, and I've I'm on the verge of speculative stocks for most of the investments. I'm always looking for up and coming ones, but I don't get down into the penny stocks. I have done that before, and I've lost my butt just like everybody else who does that. What happens with speculative stocks, and this creeps into the cryptocurrencies, are the pump and dump scenarios. Um, you're overwhelmed with information. People are so willing to give you all this information. Why? If it was that valuable, if the stock was that great, they would probably keep it to themselves and make money. When somebody's really hyping an item like that, that typically means that it's a pump and dump, which means that um, somebody buys a bunch of stock and then starts hyping it, gets the price to go up, and then they think it's pretty much at the top price, and this could be true of crypto as well, the person with this huge position sells and gets the money and moves on. And the investors who are expecting it to keep going up, they just see the bottom fall out and the price just drop precipitously. So again, there's it's interesting stuff. Movies, Wolf of Wall Street, that guy Jordan Belfry or whatever his name was, that was his deal, and he's not the first. There's a lot of those people, and they'll go with the penny stocks because they're non-SEC, non-Securities and Exchange Commission regulated. Cryptocurrencies, I do think that most people should have some element, some percentage, small percentage, but it's really hard. The minute you say, "Oh, I'm going to have 5% of my portfolio in cryptocurrency," the stuff is so volatile. You'll have anywhere between, you know, 1% and 50% on a given week. And just because it hits 50% doesn't mean it's going to stay there. So that can get a little sketchy. So it sounds like I'm pretty negative on everything I've talked about until we get to real estate. Real estate is amazing. Real estate is where wealth is typically generated, or maybe not even generated, but it's certainly where it's preserved. But it can generate a great deal of wealth for you. The ability to depreciate rental properties, the ability to enjoy an asset like living in a nice big house or a nice piece of property. There's just it's the tax benefits, it's the lack of volatility in many cases. It makes real estate just a great investment. And so that one line in the bottom there, inflation, that is the problem. That's why a lot of times people are driven to these other investments because good on them, they realize that, just holding your money in cash, particularly now, is not going to work. You are going to be losing money, and it's just not a tenable situation. I mean, I would even buy whatever. I mean, I've got literally hundreds of thousands, if not £1 million worth of steel in drill pipe that I use here around the ranch. And that's turned out to be one of my better investments just because the price of commodities is going up. It's just silly. I bought a bunch of other fencing during the COVID crisis, and the production was slow. And anyway, inflation hadn't kicked in. The fencing I bought, I could resell it now for quite a bit more than I paid for it, and it's outpaced inflation. So once in a while you hit upon things like that. But anyway, inflation is a problem, and inflation doesn't necessarily work for your own personal house because again, you usually aren't in a position where you're able to sell it and benefit from that inflation. You probably are going to be moving to a bigger house that's also being affected by inflation, so it can be a problem. Okay, so here's gold. This is, just a chart. That is not a methodical kind of investment. I mean, it's up, it's down, it's here's the Dow Jones. This is just regular stocks. Yeah, there's some dips that have happened, but you could kind of lay a straight line across here and show that that's a nice positive curve. Here you just kind of go, it's just the other problem with gold is, and they say this with silver as well, is that gold is supposed to um, be a safe haven. Well, it's kind of been there's a lot of currency manipulation and removal from the gold standard and other things that have just caused a lot of price manipulation that cause the external factors that affect the price of gold. And both gold and silver, gold, in addition to being, a rare, semi rare investment, metal, is also has industrial uses. Same with silver. So silver, both of those, in terms of conducting electricity are amazing. I mean, they're far better than copper and other things. And so in a lot of electronics and other industrial uses, there's a demand for gold and silver. And so the theory is that, well, when the market gets clobbered, gold and silver are going to be this hedge. They're going to be this safe haven. Well, unfortunately, when the market tanks, industry tanks, that's why the market generally went down, and that typically means that demand for gold and silver as industrial metals has gone down, and therefore that creates downward price pressure. So rather than rally many times, they tend not to. And then you've got, the issues with just all the hype, William Devane and all these, you see all these people on the TV always trying to push gold. And, marketing's not cheap. Commissions are not cheap. And people got to push that. So anyway, would I have a portion of it? I had a fairly not large chunk, but I had some silver, and I kept it for 4 or 5 years till finally it got back up to its break-even point. I was done. I just stepped aside. So it in the same time, the stocks I was holding were doing quite well. So not a huge fan, but anyway, um, this has to do with money supply issues. This is part of the reason for inflation. When they talk about money supply, M2 is the money stock, and anyway, we could spend quite a bit of time talking about inflation, and maybe you'll deal with that in your other finance courses. It's a bit late to be jumping in right now, but when the money supply does this, goes up like that, yeah, that's going to be inflationary pressure. So here's just a steady stream of the money supply, and then uh-oh. And so obviously that was in response to COVID and some other spending issues, but at a certain point that this money that's borrowed, the interest payments on it are, you know, a vast expense to the government now. So before they even spend money, they have to service the debt that they owe to other countries, and that's painful. All right. So this will kind of go back and we'll reiterate some of the things. I kind of gave a summary already, but yeah, collectibles, really have to know what you're doing, and you have to have a willing buyer. When somebody says, "Oh, this carpet's worth $1,000 or 2,000 or whatever," I've seen so many of friends, especially we were military, people were getting pilot bonuses, people had quite a bit of money and they're just dumping them on rugs. And number one, I've got dogs and puppies, if you haven't noticed. So that's kind of a non-starter. I couldn't imagine a dog chewing up a $2,000 rug, so that would not go well. But the other thing with these is, I think I did mention this before in the course, where I've got a quite a few Turkish friends, but this one Turkish friend, um, he was a good enough friend to loan me some of his better rugs. He has a carpet shop uh, there in the Middle East. And anyway, I took him back to New Jersey on a quick flight for a weekend and took some of his rugs in there and just to see what I could get for them. And obviously, the wholesale price on those in Turkey was about $300, and in the States they sell for about 1,500 retail. So I went to the shop and I, you know, showed these guys the rugs. They were impressed and all that, and then how much will you give me? About $300. So anyway, we're both dealing on wholesale prices. I could sell perhaps a rug to somebody for a better price, but I don't have a boutique. I mean, this guy in New Jersey had a whole, showroom full of thousands of rugs, and so the odds of me finding somebody who wants exactly anyway, it's just a tougher thing. And then there's the fraudulent nature of some of the collectibles, the rubies and some of the other stones that we got from Afghanistan were paste, not good. Speculative stock. So again, pump and dump. People are incentivized to provide bad information. If you're holding a stock, you want everybody else to chase that stock. So manipulative scheme, boost the price. They tend to go for the penny stocks, the ones that are not traded through the exchanges and not regulated by the Securities Exchange Corporation. If Elon Musk tomorrow got up and said, "Oh, this is the best stock ever," and the IRS or the SEC has come after him a couple times for saying he's trying to manipulate prices. So there's this can happen with any publicly traded company. If you're an officer with one of those companies, you have to be very careful of what you can say because you could be accused of trying to influence people to do it. That's why the people who are doing all of the manipulation tend generally try to go for the penny stocks where they're not under SEC spotlight and they can pump and dump. Get rich schemes and futures and options. If you're ever going to get involved in futures and options, options are the one to go for. Options, um, you can have unlimited upside, but limited downside. With futures, you have unlimited upside, but also unlimited downside. What happens with an option? I think I talked about this before a little bit. Let's say you're a big, cookie maker and you need a literally tons of sugar. Well, your specialty is in making cookies, not necessarily speculating in the sugar market. So a big baker, a big commercial baker, a huge one, would want some stability in that market. So what they will do is they will say, for October 2023 delivery, we want to be able to buy, sugar for $1 a pound. And they'll go to the, Chicago Board of Exchange or one of these big markets that deals in commodities. And there'll be somebody on the other side of that bet that says, sugar's going for 80 cents a pound right now. I can make 20 cents a pound on that as long as that price stays stable. So I'll take that bet. I'll take that contract. And once they take that contract, they are legally obligated to deliver sugar to that, factory at the, price and all that other stuff, the location as determined in the contract for the dollar a pound. Well, if there's a crisis, which, isn't probably too unlikely, anyway, and sugar's up to $2 a pound, the person on the other side of that futures contract still has to deliver that contract at $1 a pound, and that just comes out of hide. Now, most of the time, these futures contracts are not, the person who's in the market, you know, buying and selling these things, they're very infrequently the ones who actually do the delivery. It's usually sold off to another entity at the end for the final delivery, but you can take it to the end. I heard, what was it? I think it was soybeans, and this investor thought that the price was actually going to go up, and he was in no position to take delivery of these soybeans, but he did, and I guess he put them in his house, and humidity being what it is, got to the soybeans, they expanded and knocked the house right off the foundation. So I don't know. It's a good war story, whether it really happened or not. But now, if that would have been an options contract, um, you would have taken like a premium where you had the right but not the responsibility to deliver it. So you just pay a financial penalty that's limited, but you would not have to take it to the end. So anyway, options are right but not the responsibility, where futures are both of that. Okay, Bitcoin. So in response to just in response to everything, but some of it probably being inflation, but also just the manipulation of currencies. Bitcoin and some of the other cryptos have come to the fore. And there's a lot more to this too. We can get into Ethereum and some of the other coins that have a pretty compelling, you know, utility case for use, where you can do loans across the blockchain. You can even get into NFTs, non-fungible tokens, and the rest of that. And but sticking with Bitcoin, since we're just really talking about you know at least the leading edge, or the more established kind of crypto. It may be one reason why gold has not performed as well. Given the kind of the crisis and the currency issues, gold should have surged. And there's a lot of these, they call them gold bugs, people who have been holding out, waiting for gold's time to be valued as high as they think it should be. And in the interim, I think Bitcoin has kind of fulfilled that role. And Bitcoin is getting to be safer and safer when it's adopted by some of the bigger investors, some of the institutional investors. So, I mean, full disclosure, I've got two Bitcoins. Well, no, I had two. Got one now. Pardon me. And I just got them. Yeah, that was definitely speculation. I bought them for 700 a piece back in the day, and I sold one when it got to 2,600. I thought I was killing it, and yeah, I should have kept in. So it's been as high as, I guess, up in the 60,000s. Now they're sitting down at about 40, and then I've got some other crypto as well. But it is an interesting thing, interesting asset. Wild price fluctuations, and you definitely need to. These price fluctuations are driven primarily by human psychology, and so buying the dip, not buying at its peak, which is the easy place to buy. That's where your mind drives you to buy, but no, you've got to buy when it's down at the bottom, which is difficult. Yeah, so you can get, like I referenced, more into some of the speculative altcoins. I wouldn't say Ether's that speculative, but there's all these, we can get back into Dogecoin and Shiba and whatever, some of these other coins that are hugely speculative but disruptive. Um, there are politicians who are definitely against this. There's going to be some, centrally derived currencies, some government affiliated currencies, whatever they want to call them, that are not like Bitcoin, that are, still kind of from the old system. And obviously, governments are going to definitely find that in their benefit to try to disrupt Bitcoin to the amount that they can. And so it's not all, it could go either way, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. But, um, the fear of missing out, um, that potential to completely change the financial world, that's already kind of happening. And some of the decentralized finance apps that are available will completely disrupt and displace some of the banking services that have gone on for a long time. And anyway, it's a positive thing in my mind. And but go easy in terms of the amount of your portfolio. But anyway, so real estate, tangible asset. You can reach out and touch it. It's not like some sort of paste stone. It's not like a coin that may have been hyped. There can be some hype in real estate, but for the most part, most markets are pretty stable. Uh, and relative to everything else, yeah, it's pretty safe. We always hit on the point that it's not very liquid. Fine. Inherent hedge from most inflation. Yep. And then potential to enhance your life, if you can live in it. Also the tax benefits. I guess I should have had that hit that a little bit harder in here, but I definitely, even if you said made a, you know, $1 million in crypto, I think the smart thing to do would be to, roll a lot of that into real estate. Now that you've made money someplace else, real estate is a good place to put that money. Now you can also, generate wealth through real estate itself directly, but for me, I've always, you know, tried to maybe make some money in the stock market or do something like that and then roll it into real estate. All right. So those are the other, things I didn't talk about. Perhaps collectible firearms, other items. There's so many other investments that you could put out there, but I think I hit on the big ones. Um, and I said one of the reasons I liked real estate was because some of the tax benefits. Well, there's also a tremendous number of benefits that can be derived from owning your own business. And so I'll touch on that just a little bit. There's something to be said for being your own boss. And there's also a lot of, the reason you work is to have some nice things. Well, if you have the right type of career, you can end up with a lot of nice things that are actually used in the course of your business. So just about everything I own is somehow tied up with the business, to include, dogs, horses, pretty much everything that's not in the refrigerator or the clothes in my closet are some sort of business related thing, which is completely legal with the IRS. Now, in order to maximize and maximize the benefit and minimize the liability, um, if you're going to have your own business, you want to structure it a certain way. Sole proprietorship is kind of the default, and it's simple, but it's not good. Do not, almost in all cases. I'm not a lawyer, but if you're going to set up a business and you want some advice, any lawyer who tells you to stay in a sole proprietorship is probably not worth their time. What happens is, if let's say you open up a thing, Bob's Painting or something like that, Bob's Plumbing, something like that. So sole proprietorship, just a one owner, and all that money is going to be taxed as personal income. And so it's only going to be taxed once, which is better than some of the corporations and stuff where you get taxed on your personal income. You also get taxed on your profits, but in here it's just kind of tough. The taxation isn't necessarily the reason not to do the sole proprietorship. The real driving thing is the liability and the transfer part of it. But the liability for, let's say you're in one of these trade professions, and ladder falls off a truck and causes some massive accident, they can take everything, to include your personal items, your home, your cars, your everything you got can be just wiped out. If you happen to pass away, the business is gone. So transferring this over to your heirs, very difficult, because it's owned by the individual. When you die, it died. Whereas a corporation, it's a legal entity, right? You die, well, the corporation still goes with whatever the other shareholders are, or whatever the beneficiaries are. But it's not a big event in terms of the corporation, the death of the member. With the sole proprietor, it's over. That business is closed. Partnership, uh, again, again, you know, speak to a lawyer if you're thinking about doing a partnership. But for me, no. Again, the problem with the liability is now you have two people involved. Um, and here they are, the tax benefits. There's no real tax benefits, but for me, being involved in business, even a marriage is difficult to work out. And there you hopefully had something in common. In a partnership, oof, anyway, so for those type of reasons, I would not do a partnership. Now you could be a partners and set up some sort of corporate structure and get the benefit, but just be a straight partnership, not something I'd want to do. And then a corporation. So you have different types of corporations. You have C class, you have LLCs. Not as hard as you would think to set them up. Can all be done online without the use of a lawyer. About $250 or so, I think, of the current fees. They'll probably, depending on what you're going to do, you probably get a business license as well. So, you know, two separate, same state of Alaska website, but you go to the corporations section to set up your corporation. You go to the business licensing thing to pay your fee there. But the deal with that is that you have this limited liability and you have just a lot of flexibility. Now you can be a publicly traded corporation or you can be a private corporation. So corporation, there legitimately should be about 4 or 5 little subheadings under there for the different types. S corp, up to 100 shareholders, tax to the partnership, limited liability. Believe it or not, I'm actually an S corp. That's how I've got mine set up. And it's kind of complex, but the difference, I was an LLC, but it made more sense to be an S corp. Limited liability, an LLC is, it says it in the name, primarily to avoid lawsuits. The S corp has that same liability protection, but it also has tax benefits that work out with that. I'm lucky enough, like I say, I've always done my own taxes until I stumbled upon a lady who actually worked for the IRS for many years and then went to law school. And after a discussion with her, I've restructured things. But anyway, again, a bit beyond the scope of personal finance, but you may find yourself as an S corp at one point. So just another review. Single individual, yeah, mainly on services, typically pretty small, but 3/4, and that's not because they're good. That's just because they're easy. People are lazy. People, think it's too complex, and then they get sued and they wish they would have done something else. Women business owners list. I don't know that I'd go there, but I would say that somebody offering you a loan is going to say, well, it's all based upon you. It's not a corporation that's going to be an enduring entity. If you're taking out a loan from them, they're essentially, giving you a life insurance policy because if you die, their loan's in jeopardy. They don't like that. Here's the different corporations. So the big C corporations. Now this is going to be these numbers are 5.3. Wow, I thought most of them, they're just talking absolute numbers. If you're looking at absolute terms of like assets under management or dollar figures, yeah, you put all these public, Tesla, GM, Microsoft, Google, all those out, or Alphabet, I guess. Anyway, all those companies. But in terms of numbers, yeah, C corporations are comprise a smaller number But in terms of size of employees and all that other stuff, partnerships and S corps about a quarter, and then all these sole proprietorships. So again, that's not a positive thing. This lack of, or this number of sole proprietorships is, that's a lot of whatever assets at risk needlessly. Ease, high level of secrecy. Yeah, I don't know if that's all that profit keeps all the profits and losses. Flexibility, certainly. Government regulations minimal, taxed at individual rates, can be easily dissolved. Yep. Liability. Nobody wants to loan money to just, it's like a personal loan. You're taking on all the different skills tied to the single owner. There's no shared risk here, and then this higher taxation rate because it's all coming under the charts. The IRS code is made for people typically, working in a bank and making a salary and doing those sorts of things. When you start putting your painting business in here, man, your revenue coming in, you've got higher numbers. Now, at the end of the day, because of your expenses, you're probably not making that much more money, but in the accounting process, your numbers can look quite a bit higher. Family farms, when you look at the amount of assets they hold, it can be crazy in amount to the revenue they generate. Partnerships, typically larger, doesn't kind of generalized. How to work out on partners, maintain effective. Again, all these things just seem like they can go horribly wrong. Just like a friendship agreement. I mean, it's codified, but just the same. If the partners aren't getting along, it's a problem. You see, you see some entities like this, but you'll also see something that looks like a partnership, and then you look at the underlying structure and you find out it's actually an LLC or maybe an S corp. General partnerships, limited partnerships. I've been involved in real estate issues. There was one. This was kind of the tail end of a big spurt in real estate that was happening in Florida, and I happened to be living down there at the time. And they were developing just all kinds of beachfront communities, and I got involved in one as a limited partner, and thankfully that was a good deal because the general partners got wiped out and lost a bunch of money. Me, I got out before things turned south, and so I didn't lose any money. But if I would have stayed in, even as a limited partner, all I could have lost was the amount of money I had invested. These guys lost more than they had invested. They, start going after their personal assets, their own homes, their own cars, their, spouse's property. It gets ugly. So if you're ever in a partnership or any sort of legal, arrangement, and they tell you you have, you're limited, you want to make sure that you do not violate that. So do not share management, but share profits. I worked once, this was a long time ago, delivered pizzas when I was in college, and it was a limited partnership owned by all these dentists. And it was the craziest, it was the best place to work ever because there was no management. It was just chaos. And the dentist could see what was going on, but they couldn't get involved because they were limited partners. And they had this, other college kid who was running the thing, and he just let us do what we wanted. And they could not get involved in the management aspects, or else they'd be considered a general partner and be liable. So it was strange situations, but Anyway, articles of partnership. Yep, yep, yep. Lawyers involved. So maybe we're getting a little too deep into some of these business things, but the main issue that I'm trying to drive you to is that if you're going to get involved in some sort of business, however small it is, if it's conceivable at all to have any liability, make sure you go through the pain to make it an LLC or some sort of business arrangement with liability protection. Um, and don't end up as just another one of these sole proprietorships that could cause you all sorts of legal problems. Disadvantages of the partnership. So again, a lot like a sole proprietorship, just with a couple people. Hard to find external funding. Yep. Yep. Corporations. So assets and liabilities are separate from the owners. So you own shares, right? You're involved to what your investment is in that company. So they can be sued. Legal entities, they can be sued in court and the rest of that, and account for the majority of U.S. sales and income. So again, smaller in number as compared to sole proprietor, but the majority of the sales and incomes because the big boys kind of know what they're doing and are smart enough to get and to be some sort of corporation. Also, it makes it easier for inheritance type things where you know I can bring children in and make them shareholders in the corporations, and so that whole estate planning is much easier to work out because you don't need to transfer those assets to them. It's just their percentage of ownership changes. So stocks and dividends. Not all corporations. What they're talking about here are C corporations where they have to do this. No, um, not all public. These are public corporations that are selling stocks, whereas for private corporations, you don't have to get to that level. State procedures. You'll notice that a lot of states, where a lot of corporations are formed in the state of Delaware. I'm trying to think the other states. There's a couple states though that have very little visibility, very, very basically anti-consumer, but pro-corporation. That's what Delaware is. Delaware has got, if you try to sue a corporation in the state of Delaware, um, good luck. And so you'll see a lot of corporations are incorporated in the state of Delaware and just happen to do business in Alaska or somewhere else. And that's because of the, better treatment. And it's completely on purpose. A state like Delaware will set that up to make that advantageous to get all those corporate filing fees and all that corporate money to come into their state. But it doesn't work out for the rest of us. So domestic corporation form. Okay, so now we're getting a little bit beyond personal finance, but private corporation. Just no stock sold, not required. We talked a little bit back in the stock process. If you are going to be a public corporation, you go from being a private corporation to a public corporation. You get some lawyers and investment bank who can make this offering, and you do your IPO, the initial public offering, you sell that stock and you go public. So if you are a public corporation, sure, anybody may buy it. Public corporation, quasi-public, and then nonprofits. Those are in the public sector in terms of private corporate, and as opposed to private corporations. So, board of directors legally liable for mismanagement or misuse. So this is kind of interesting. Sometimes you'll see, for example, people will go after Apple. Not that Apple's a perfect company, but many times there'll be some stock manipulation that will go on about when Apple's about to, release a report or do something like that, and when they do their SEC filings. And what can happen here is you know somebody with obviously not Apple's best interest at heart will try to drive down the Apple stock, and so they'll find some sort of thing like oh, Apple, iPhone sales are dramatically down in the first quarter. Well, that's because Christmas just happened. Christmas is over, and there's usually not that, iPhone sales are tied to Christmas. There is a surge. So you would expect, in January, the sales of iPhones, for example, to be down a little bit as compared to what they were in late December. Anyway, so the reason they time it like that is because Apple also has to do some SEC filings, um, I guess in February, and they can't make any public comments in the 30 days prior or whatever. So it's such a tried and true game where they try to drive the Apple stock price down, and Apple as a corporation can't comment on their sales figures because they're in that SEC window, and it's just manipulative. But anyway, the reason why Apple can't comment is because they're legally responsible. They are prohibited from making comments, or if they say anything that might be construed as them trying to manipulate the price, they can be sued. If they say that the phones are doing great when they're not, they can be sued. The, there's a lot to be said for some of this SEC pressure to keep these people pretty honest, and so they typically end up making pretty guarded statements because they don't want to be accused of doing anything quite wrong. We're not going to go through preferred stocks again. Not a big deal. You could look it up if you like, but it doesn't typically happen that often. It's funny, another Elon Musk thing is one of the reasons that's theorized that he's involved in some of these Dogecoin and some of these other things is to kind of take the heat off him for some of the things he actually does do with Bitcoin and his own corporation, where you know it would be a very tough case to make that anybody's manipulating Dogecoin and some of these speculative coins. So it anyway, things kind of get lost in the confusion when he makes some of those purchases. Common stock voting rights. Voting rights are tied to the number of shares you own. If you end up owning any stock, um, you're going to get typically a letter in the mail, proxy type thing where you've got 100 shares. Nobody's super impressed. They're not going to invite you to their big corporate gala, but they will send you a letter saying, would you like to have somebody else vote in your stead? A proxy. So assign your voting privilege to someone else. Um, anyway, so we talked about just advantages of corporation in general: limited liability, ease of transfer and ownership, perpetual life, um, secure trading. Yep, and potential for rapid expansion. You can take a private company to a public company. There's a drone company, DJI, that was actually at one point, they make good products and they were pretty dominant, but always a privately held corporation. So you can't necessarily invest in them. Well, you can't. But if they wanted to go public, they could do an IPO, they could sell stock, and they could get even bigger. But sometimes when you see a company go, wow, that seems like an up and coming company, I'd really want to buy some stock in it. You may find out that they're privately held. They're not a public company. Disadvantages. So corporations as entities are going to be taxed. The corporate profits are going to be taxed. And then they're going to pay their dividends or profits or whatever off to their shareholders. Well, those shareholders, those will show up in their private income. And so again, they can be taxed. So the double taxation is one reason why, they try to keep corporate taxes low, um, but it doesn't always work. Expensive to form depends on the corporation, but not that hard. If you're going to sell stock and things like that, publicly traded, that could be hard. But I've actually formed a C corporation before. I formed a nonprofit before. It's all just done with, a few $100 in the state of Alaska website. Not a problem. You could do one tonight. So um, that's really no excuse to remain a sole proprietorship. Disclosure of information to government and public. For okay, again, they're focused on C corporations. For LLCs and stuff, you don't have to do that. Owners and managers, not always the same, can have different goals. Depends. They're assuming a large corporation. Joint ventures, not going to go there. Anyway, a little bit more complex. S corp eliminates the double taxation, retains the limited liability. So that's why there's some other tax benefits too that are kind of beyond the scope of this course, but I've found it quite favorable to be an S corp. LLCs, yep. Cooperatives more for nonprofit type things. Farmers will often set up a cooperative. I guess there can be some housing cooperatives as well. Different legal structures you can set up. All right. So that was some of those, alternate investments. We also talked about some corporations, how they're formed. And then the last part that I want to cover to kind of make things complete is real estate purchase process. Real estate is probably the largest investment that you're going to buy, and it can be kind of confusing. Um, you know, and I probably had, I don't know, 10, 11 houses through the course of my life, and in Germany, Spain, and then obviously a bunch over here. And I did sell real estate for a little while. I'm still licensed up here, but I've let it go dormant. So whatever. I have no desire to go back into selling real estate, but I know a little bit about the process, and I think there's some things that we can talk about to help you out when you hopefully are buying some property. All right. So the first thing, you need to get a pre-approval. If you're going to look for a home, and when you talk about agents, the reasons I don't not interested in selling homes anymore is because I don't want to apply that much effort to any one thing in my life. I mean, if you're going to be a good real estate salesperson, you need to give it 100%, and it shouldn't be something you kind of do on the side. There's a lot of people who do that, and probably 95% of them kind of do that, and they sell about 5% of the property. And then there's this 5% that apply themselves 100%, and they sell, this little 5% sells about 95% of the properties. There's certain names that, if you've been around Anchorage and the Valley, and these people are just, whew, but they're, obviously not people I want to hang out with. I mean, I remember the one lady told me, yeah, you need to get rid of your dogs. Those are a waste of time. You need to do this. You need to do that. And I'm just like, oof, no, that ship has sailed. I'm a little not lazy, but I think I've got a work-life balance that this woman clearly had never entertained. Anyway, so but if my point is, if you're out looking for a house or selling a house, who do you want? You want one of those 5% people. Those 5% people are busy, and they're not, messing around with people who aren't serious. So if you go to this person, this salesperson that you're trying to work with. And really, I mean, you need them kind of more than they need you because they usually have the connections and get access to the most of the properties and all that kind of stuff. And they ask you how much you want to spend and what you're approved for, and you say, well, we haven't done that yet. That's a disqualifier. Nobody, no real estate salesperson that you want to deal with is going to take you on unless you're pre-approved because it just shows kind of a lack of seriousness. And it also, you don't know really, what you can afford, or maybe you can afford more. I mean, not that you want to max it out, but you need to get pre-approved. So it's not hard to do. You go to one of the lenders. You probably pay $50 up front for a credit check, which is fine. You're gonna have to pay that anyway later on. It's probably more than $50 now. But anyway, you get pre-approved and they give you a letter and then you're good to go. Now, actually looking for the property itself, it's all about location, right? So I've, in neighborhoods, I'm not a big fan of tract homes, never have been, but in my mind, they kind of have an expiration. They're nice when they're new, and then they get a little seedy, and then they get primarily, they just kind of go downhill. But anyway, each to his own. But when you're trying to invest in real estate, the location is critical. The licensee, the real estate agent, we don't really use the term agent in Alaska because there's been some crooked people involved, and they have really scammed some folks. And so, in the state of Alaska, you normally won't see agent because they're not. They're a licensed salesperson. So, there's also for buying a home, it's kind of a no-brainer because the person selling the home pays the commission. So, and you're not obligated to buy through that salesperson unless, of course, they showed you the home. But if you go and find something else on your own, you're under no obligation to have to buy from that person. There's Zillow, now there's Redfin, there's a whole bunch of other services that, as they mature, will probably displace the full service real estate, licensee. The 6% commission, although it's not written in stone and it can't really be legally enforced unless you agree to it, which you typically do when you sign up with them. But that 6%, the real estate people aren't making that much money because they've got a bunch of fees they've got to pay, multiple listing service fees, advertising fees, office fees. They've got to split it with a broker. They end up having to do some volume to stay above water, but just the same, 6% seems like a lot of money. And if it can be done, with more automation and more online, there's a lot of pressure and a lot of companies out there that are trying to make that a reality. And they may get that way at a certain point. The other point about using I'm just going to call them an agent because that's what they'd be calling them in any other state. The agent is somebody who's a real estate professional, but also their license, their reputation, their business is on the line. If they don't disclose something to you, some known defect that they should kind of be cognizant of, being in the real estate business, they can be in serious trouble, and they generally just won't do that. They'll tell you everything they know. Whereas if it's for sale by owner stuff and they know something's a little wrong and they just try not to emphasize that or mention it or perhaps even hide it, going to court with those people, an individual, previous seller, is going to be tough to do. With an agent, not so much a problem. And the agent's probably going to lose in court. So agents are generally very forthcoming with any defects in the property and just in general trying to comply and make sure things are right. So also homeowners association, love them or hate them, they're out there. Again, I'm not a fan of homeowners association, but then again, I've never had anybody, a neighbor paint their house, purple next door or do something like that would be precluded by most homeowners associations. Um, yep. So there's when they're doing a listing, they have to go through and tell everything that has been done. I guess on this property, they never told me, but the whole butcher baker, if you ever track that thing, if you look on Frozen Ground, the movie, this property was kind of prominent in that. Um, anyway, so what I'm referring to is if there was a murder or something going on the property, they would probably have to disclose it. But this property is so large that it just didn't quite bubble up to the surface. Appraisal. Um, Anytime you're involved in a process like this, the bank is going to insist upon an appraisal. And you've made an offer for this property, and so you're hoping that the property appraises, that it comes in at the value that the people are asking for it. Well, the problem is that you sort of take this as a sign that you paid the right price when the appraisal comes in correctly. It's really not so much like that. The system's almost rigged. The appraiser knows what you offered for the property, and they'll look at other properties in the area, comparable sales, and they'll try to make it work so that the house comes in at appraisal. So now, if you've got a unique property, something that's not just in a tract that doesn't have a whole bunch of homes around it that look like it and that have recently sold, it makes it more difficult for the appraiser. So if there's a lot of land or something like that, it can really uh, be a problem. Yeah, appraisal is a financial institution's way of making sure the contract price is right. Not necessarily. You can still overpay for a home, and it will still maybe meet the appraisal. And it doesn't mean that there's going to be another buyer lined up to pay that same price in case you know, decided not to do it. Inspections. There's different inspectors out there. You get certain inspectors that will concentrate on pretty benign items. They'll look at the distance of the outlet from the wall, and I mean just some weird things that are kind of in the code that are important, but not necessarily critical. I've had inspectors, make sure that some of these. It always seemed to be around the electrical outlets. That it wasn't that they were unsafe or a fire hazard, but it was there's a distance from the floor they should be, and these other things, and they completely overlooked structural damage. I looked at buying a home out in Mirror Lake that was literally sinking into Mirror Lake. The ground was unstable. The septic system no longer worked. The groundwater was rising, and it was good to go with the inspection. And that's when it just didn't even pass the common sense test for me. So I brought in a proper home inspector, was also an engineer, and yeah, he's like, yeah, he quantified all the things that I had already seen and said, do not ever consider buying this house. But the bank probably would have let me take a loan on it. It wouldn't have been a good loan for them, but it just wasn't something that got caught in their thing. So, having been in a real estate office, I do know that there's, certain inspectors that people will use to not upset the buyers. Some inspectors that just do a very, you know, whatever lackluster inspection and don't find many write-ups. And then there's other ones that just scare the bejesus out of people. They come up with a whole list of defects and make it sound like this house is no good at all. So a lot of variability on the inspectors. For most of us, though, if you have a smart agent, I've done this on a few homes where the inspector finds all these little nitnoid things. You've already agreed on a price with the seller. The seller is motivated. They want to sell. They've been in this sales process for about a month now, and you come back to them and say, well, there's all these things that are defects that need to be fixed, or maybe we can take a little bit off the price. And so, I've got as much as $10,000 off the price. And granted, there were some defects I needed to live with, and some things that I'll fix eventually. But they certainly weren't showstoppers, and they were things that I could fix on my own. But the $10,000 reflected having a contractor come in there and do it, and all those things I took care of myself. So anyway, inspections can be used to your benefit. Loan approval or commitment. So yeah, the credit process is much more onerous than it has been, especially if you're self-employed. That seems to be more difficult. But it does help, I think, to have a local lender who's on the same time zone, who knows how these things work and is interested in getting this loan closed. And I tend to use the same mortgage bank each time. Now, what you have is you have a bunch of companies, local companies, let's say Home State or a couple others, and they will get the loan all accomplished. They're your interface. You provide them all your, proof of income, your bank stubs, and all that stuff, and they get the loan done. And then about a month afterwards, after the sale is complete, you get a letter from could be AmeriHome, Freedom, Wells Fargo, whoever, and Homestead or these other guys have sold the loan because their business model is they don't have these vast sums of money where they actually carry the mortgages. They do all the processing and they sell the loan, and it works out great for both of you. And so you end up, servicing your mortgage through one of these other companies down the road, which is just fine. But I've had much better luck with that, and I know from, in the real estate business, people would use, say, maybe Quicken or some of the other online type things, and it didn't quite work out as well for them as they would have liked. Final walkthrough. So you go through the property, make sure everything's squared away. Again, a property I was buying, went through there, and one of the toilets was leaking, which came up in the inspection, and the floor had been damaged a little bit, and so they agreed to replace the floor because that was a little bit beyond the scope of what I wanted to do. Well, they were taking out the hardwood and putting in some laminate. And it's like, whoa. So anyway, that needed to be cleared up before the closing, so that they went through and put in the proper flooring and made it just so. And then the closing. So a couple days actually before the closing, you should be presented with a huge stack of paper from the escrow office or through your agent primarily, but anyway, there's a whole bunch of documents. If you go into the closing just cold, they'll still present you all these documents, but they'll be sitting there watching you and asking you, whether you agree with this, agree with that, and it's just too much paperwork to take in that quick of manner, and so you'll end up just signing it just to get the house done, and you put yourself in kind of a strange legal position because you are signing documents that you haven't really reviewed. So there's a legal requirement for them to at least offer to present those to you beforehand, and you should take them up on that. Now, that being said, there's a bunch of documents in there that are, all these federally mandated documents about explaining how much interest you're going to be paying over the course of the loan, and there may be some sticker shock involved in that, but it just, those documents kind of make it look worse than it actually is. What typically happens is people are shocked when they see how much interest they're going to pay over the course of the loan. But um, again, we're talking 30 years typically for most mortgages. And so when you look at it in those terms, it's not as scary as it would appear. They'll typically tell you you either need to bring money, or in many cases, I've got money back. So not generally supposed to happen, but I've never had anywhere I had to show up with a big amount of money for closing. And there should not be any last minute surprises. All right, so that's kind of the housing process. Some of you may have already purchased something, but I'm less leery about buying a home than I am a car. I mean, a car is a guaranteed losing financial transaction. You're just, it doesn't appreciate, and it's going to cost you in the long run. Whereas a house, knock on wood, I mean, I've always made money on real estate, and that's the norm. So, okay, the last thing about the term project, the offer is open. If do your best and send me a copy if you like beforehand. I've got a pretty wide aperture. If you can convince me that this is, something that's useful and cause you to think about, how you're going to get ahead financially, you'll probably get a good grade. You need to meet the standard in terms of the, 4 to 5 pages, but that's not difficult, because if you really do address all the different things, you're going to have to make it that long. So don't worry about that. Final exam prep. So that'll be next week. I'll be putting that out whenever. I'll have to look at the dates. RP Now process. It's going to be done through, the UAE learning site. Not a big deal. They've changed their procedures slightly, but they had been pretty cooperative, and they're more attentive on the phones as it gets closer to exam time. And that's about it. So hope you've enjoyed the course. We'll, do a big review and talk about more issues and details. If there's anything else you wanted to discuss in terms of financial instruments or anything else you've heard, let me know via an email. We'll either address it there, or if it's a broader topic, we'll address it in the final lecture / review. Good luck.